Why do we allow conspiracy theories when it comes from certain political ideologies? You know, shady, dark money in Tufton Street and Liz Truss is pulling all of the strings. I mean, this is just a conspiracy theory. What do you think?
Well, if it's a conspiracy, we're evidently not doing very well because several of those things are no longer true. I mean, it's very tempting to say at this point, you know, bless them, they're just numpties. I was young once and believed in silly things, and they'll grow out of it. But the chap who sprayed the think tanks yesterday, not ours, by the way, we're in a different building, is a pensioner. He looks like he comes more from the radical tanky wing of the hard left movement. And he was making his statements and saying things that were demonstrably untrue, that if they actually got their way would cause people to die. And I just want to underpin that point. This is not a harmless group having a good time making a mess and causing criminal damage in London. Their ideas are dangerous and awful. They believe in stopping oil and gas in the medium term, which first would put up the price of both, which means that pensioners could not afford to heat their homes in winter. The government cannot guarantee to suppress energy prices forever. We've seen what happens to the markets when they try to do that. And what would happen if we did stop drilling all across the world is those prices would go up, the alternatives would not be ready, they'd certainly be incentivised by higher prices, but we don't benefit from that. It just means we get the same energy at a higher cost. So they're talking about stopping heat, they're talking about stopping transport, they're talking about stopping power for most of the time. All of those things are very, very dangerous and should not be indulged.
It is interesting that these people sort of see themselves as democratic when, to me, to any rational observer, I would have thought this is the opposite of democracy. This is trying to change the course of a democratically elected government through intimidation, through threats, and yes, indeed, through violence against property in this case. Why is it being indulged?
Well, I think if you go back to when the Extinction Rebellion protests start, there was a lot of indulging going on from the police. It was sort of, oh, they're just having a bit of fun, and we sort of agree with their general point that the environment and climate change is important, which, just to be clear, is the received wisdom and view across most institutions and the government. So quite whose minds they're trying to change is very unclear. Most people agree with their long-term aim, but not their methods. And that indulging has diminished now. I mean, I think the police were humiliated when this group last week attacked Scotland Yard, and there were police officers standing around doing very little to intervene when they could quite clearly should have arrested them for criminal damage immediately and taken them away. I think there's about 7 Just Stop Oil protesters in prison at the moment, about 31 over the course of the last 6 months, and that number will increase because they seem intent on causing this damage and criminal behaviour without anybody doing enough to stop them.
I mean, what do you say to those who say, actually, maybe there's some truth in what they're saying? They've said, you know, Liz Truss's ideas have been rejected, and now, you know, Liz Truss finds herself on the backbenches, Prime Minister only a couple of weeks ago, and that many of those free market, so to speak, think tanks that are associated with 55 Tufton Street, some people think that their ideas have been discredited since Liz Truss's premiership. So what would you say to that?
Well, this is selective thinking, isn't it? I mean, Liz Truss's big flagship policy was one of the largest acts of Tory socialism since Rishi Sunak did the last one over COVID. So she introduced the energy price guarantee and a similar scheme for business that would have cost £100 to £200 billion a year, depending on the price of gas in the regional market. Now, that ain't free market. We suggested as an alternative that what she should do is increase targeted benefits so the poor and vulnerable would not suffer. She should help businesses that would be more exposed to energy prices. And then she should cut taxes instead of bringing the prices down so that you would retain that incentive to use less energy, which she did not do. So a huge mistake on which she put a few free market ideas that cost money as well, but they were about 20% of the package. So all the left wants to do at the moment is talk about that 20%, and on the day they talked about just 1% of it. So it's not true, and it is a record of failure that's very sad, but one hopefully that Rishi Sunak can now correct.